Hello and welcome to the Quincy Access Television Studios. I'm Mark Crosby. Thank you for joining us for In Your Neighborhood, a program that looks at various wards throughout the city and helps you to stay healthy and informed, safe, I suppose. I say safe primarily because the beginning of this program is going to feature talk about pedestrian and bicyclist safety. Such an important issue not only in the city of Quincy, but surrounding communities. There have been a number of fatalities both here and throughout the Commonwealth. So rules of the road for both drivers and bicyclists. And joining me today to kind of talk about that and more is the Ward 5 City Councilor. That would be Dan Minton. Dan, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back in this capacity. You, of course, been into the Quincy Access Television Studios as a lieutenant in the Quincy Quincy Police Department. Right. So welcome back.
Nice to be back.
And Irene Lutz, who is a member of the Bicycle Commission here in the city of Quincy, also the League of American Bicyclists. She is a certified instructor. You have also been to Quincy Access Television on many occasions. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Great to have you both. The topic that we're going to begin with is so important. Safety is number one priority for not only residents of this city, but certainly for all of us throughout the country. It's disturbing that we have heard and read about the number of pedestrian accidents, the number of bicyclists that have been injured or possibly have been killed. So I guess this program's aim is to really instruct folks as to how to behave on our roads and I guess sidewalks as well. So I guess I'd start Dan, just talking about how we decided to kind of bring this into your neighborhood, if you will.
Well, there's a lot of bicyclists on the Quincy Shore Drive area to the parks, and there are also a lot of people traveling from south to north on Hancock Street and a lot of the busier roads. So we want to bring this to the attention of drivers, and mainly because we're not like Somerville and Cambridge where people are educated and attuned to looking out for bicyclists. You know, we have them and people don't look for them because there aren't that many. But by educating the public to be on the lookout for bicyclists and take measures to prevent an injury or an accident.
And there are laws on the books, and we'll talk about those in just a bit. One of the things I want to talk to you, Irene, about is I guess the thought that bicyclists are people too. They're not simply, it's not simply a vehicle, or not a vehicle, but a mode of transport.
I think sometimes our transportation system anonymizes us, sort of makes us, disconnects us from our humanity. Like we're in our car, we're talking to the people in the car, but we're not able to connect with the people outside of the car. And what the League Bicycle Friendly Driver Instruction tries to do is to remind everyone that we all just want to get somewhere safely when we're out on our roads, and a bicyclist, just like a driver, has the right to be on the road and has the desire to arrive at their destination safely. And we're all just people trying to get where we need to go.
But clearly, bicyclists are more vulnerable.
Absolutely, absolutely. My husband's a boater, and he talks about the law of gross tonnage. And on the water, a larger boat has the right of way because it can't stop in the water. And I tend to think about it in the opposite way on the road, that the person driving the larger, more potentially harmful vehicle has a bigger responsibility to be aware of the vulnerable people around you and to take action that would help keep everyone safe. I think safety is a mutual responsibility, but we tend to hold participants equally, despite the disparity in the potential for harm, depending on our chosen mode of transport.
It brings up a story. I was talking to a lieutenant in the Quincy Police Department, and he told me about when you talked about the water. how kayaker had to get out of the way of the ferry, not the ferry getting out of the way of the kayaker out in Boston Harbor.
It's the physics, right? The larger boat has too much mass, the water has no resistance, you can't stop. But on our streets, larger vehicles have the ability to behave differently, and so I tend to try and emphasize the responsibility that a driver of a large vehicle, whether it's a sedan or an SUV or a truck, you have the potential to do more damage to people who are using our roads in wheelchairs, on bikes, on scooters, or just walking, and so that comes with a greater responsibility to maintain awareness.
And Dan, you had mentioned Quincy Shore Drive and Hancock Street being kind of the main thoroughfares that you'll see often bicyclists on. Do you think that this has become more of an issue because of development in the city, more people living in the city?
Oh, definitely.
And maybe not totally understanding bike lanes, and we'll get to those in just a second.
Right, but you have serious commuters coming from Weymouth on their bikes, and they're also coming with all the motor vehicle traffic coming from Weymouth and Hingham, and it all merges at the Neponset Bridge. And so it gets a little dicey with all the vehicles. And almost any morning you go out and you can see backup of cars everywhere, and people tired of waiting for the red light or the stop sign because there are so many, and they make moves that are dangerous to bicyclists and pedestrians.
Let's talk about some of those, I suppose, rules of the shared road, we'll call it. Let's talk about passing and overtaking.
So, and Dan can speak to this a little more, but last April, not this month, but a year ago, the Commonwealth passed a new law called the Vulnerable Road Users Law, and it requires that drivers leave a minimum of 4 feet when you are overtaking or passing a vulnerable road user. And I want to emphasize that vulnerable road user is not just a bicyclist. It's a police officer who's on detail. It's a tow truck operator. Anybody who is on the road who is at risk of injury because of how they are present in that space. And so that 4-foot passing law allows for the safety and comfort of both the driver and the bicyclist, and the vulnerable person. The idea of sharing the lane is when it is safe and spacious enough to do so. That law does allow, again, I don't want to overstep, but it does allow drivers to cross the a double yellow line if it is clear ahead to safely pass someone who they need to overtake. But I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about a bicyclist's place on the road.
Right.
Like, why is this bicyclist in my lane, in the driving lane? And it's because bicyclists are actually the operators of vehicles, just like drivers of motor vehicles are. We are expected to ride in the rightmost lane that is appropriate for our destination, and we are expected to behave as part of the transportation system and follow the same guidelines, riding with traffic on the right. There are some exceptions, like we are allowed to pass drivers on the right, and that is not an acceptable behavior for a driver of a motor vehicle, but that is acceptable for a bicyclist. We want to follow the same rules in terms of signage. Yield signs apply to bicyclists. Stop signs and red lights apply to bicyclists. So if we're all using the same systems and following those guidelines appropriately, the communication is facilitated. We become predictable within the network, and that's one of the most important things as a bicyclist is to be a predictable participant in the transportation network.
Do you want to speak about the law in more detail?
Well, you
did a great job.
She pretty much covered it. The only addition I would make, though, is for police officers or firefighters, if they're on an accident scene or the police officer stopped a motor vehicle. For their safety, it's great, but it's also an educational moment. When the officer has the motor vehicle stopped and a vehicle's coming too close, he can pull that vehicle over too and either educate or citation or both. So it's a great measure, it really, my days out being out there stopping cars, and you don't know if somebody was intentionally coming too close to you or just didn't know the law and didn't use reasonable
Well, we could
measures.
even, as far as vehicles, we could talk about motor vehicles. We could talk about the introduction of the move over law, which I don't know how old that is. That's a relatively new law, relatively new. But if the car was able to get in the lane furthest away from the officer, you're required to do so.
Right. But as Irene was saying also, if there's not enough room to get by and it's safe to do so, you can go in the opposite lane and avoid any accident or any injuries.
Let's talk about some, I suppose, maneuvers. Let's talk about something called the right hook.
So there are some typical occurrences or types of crashes that are common between a bicyclist and a vehicle. And one of them is the right hook. So the right hook occurs when a driver overtakes a cyclist and then turns right in front of them. So when a driver does this to you, when I'm in my car or a car driving and someone does this to me, I'm like, oh, they just cut me off, right? So it's a right turn that cuts off a cyclist.
Right.
And there are ways to avoid this. One is to, when you're driving, remember that a bicyclist isn't a stationary object. We're moving at a relatively rapid pace, right? We're going to keep up with you, even if we go into your blind spot for a minute. We're there, and so you want to maintain an awareness when you overtake a bicyclist that you may need to slow down and stop and let them pass you again before you can make your turn. So that's one of the biggest things that a driver can do. And then bicyclists can use positioning to prevent right hooks, primarily at intersections. On straightaways, when there are driveways, it's a lot of awareness from the bicyclist that a driver may be passing you and anticipating they're potentially taking a right turn in front of you, and negotiating that space and not assuming that they're not going to cut you off. But at an intersection, if there's a right turn only lane, a bicyclist should position themselves in the straight lane, the through lane, in order to indicate to the drivers around them that they want to be going, that they're going to be going straight, so that if a driver is next to them in that right turn lane, they don't then cut them off as they start or go through the intersection. If it's a straight and right turn lane, if the cyclist is going straight, they want to be in the center of the lane in order to indicate to the driver that they're going straight through and not turning. Again, it's about communicating, and how do we do that when we're enclosed or cut off from each other?
Right. I'd like to talk about signaling, because cyclists don't, well, drivers in cars don't often, sometimes don't as well, signal, and the importance of that, and the importance of putting up the right signal.
Yes. So there's a lot. There are the basic hand signals that I have found a lot of people remember, but some people obviously don't remember from their driver's ed days. And I'm happy to demonstrate. This is a left turn. We use our left arm to signal. A left turn is a straight out arm. A right turn is a raised arm. And a stop signal is an arm down at an angle. And using your left hand to do that keeps your right hand free for your rear brake, which is safer to use if you only have one brake available. Using your front brake can cause you to flip over. And also, the people you're trying to communicate with are on your left, all those drivers. So using those signals can help facilitate communication. However, a bicyclist isn't required to do that, because sometimes the safe operation of the vehicle requires both hands on the handlebars. So we hope for an understanding from drivers that sometimes we can't communicate even though we would want to. And so a lot of times that positioning in the roadway, taking the lane, is an attempt to communicate without being able to signal. If we take the lane, we're not trying to be rude. We're not trying to slow someone down. It's not an aggressive action. It's a self-preservation action, a communication action. And so I hope that if drivers come away from this discussion with anything, it's the idea that bicyclists are not there to make your day worse. We're just trying to get where we want to go.
Right. A cop can pull over a car for not signaling, but can't necessarily pull over a bicyclist for not signaling, correct?
Well, they could, but as Irene said, they're not required to because of safety purposes. And I don't really know of any policemen that's ever actually pulled anybody over.
Well, that was my next question. Something called dooring. Explain what that is. Obviously, it has to do with the vehicle's door.
Yes. A lot of our bike lanes in Quincy are actually what we call door zone bike lanes because they are placed next to the parked vehicle lane. And you have 5 feet of space there in a door zone bike lane to navigate. And unfortunately, really only the left-hand foot and a half of that is navigable space for a bicyclist in order to stay out of what we call that door zone. So when a car door opens, it's about 3 to 4 feet into the space next to the car. And a lot of times, if a bicyclist is riding too close and someone who's just parked their vehicle opens the door without looking, that is a prime example of, if the bicyclist gets hit, you can get knocked out into the moving vehicle lane, and that is an incident of a dooring crash. So there are ways to prevent this. I've already indicated for the bicyclist, it would be to ride in the leftmost part of a door zone bike lane, closer to the moving traffic than to the parked cars. And that's counterintuitive for a lot of newer riders because you feel more comfortable next to the cars that aren't moving than you do next to the cars that are. But a car driver in a moving vehicle is going to have more of an awareness of you than someone who just parked their car and has spent time gathering their things together before they open the door. Something that drivers can do is called the Dutch Reach. So in the Netherlands, driver's ed courses teach drivers to open their car door in a certain way that helps facilitate awareness of bicyclists coming up on the side of the car. So rather than opening the car door with your left hand, they're taught to reach across with their right hand to open the door so that your body is forced to turn and you have a view of traffic, whether it's vehicular or bicyclist, that would be approaching. And then you're able to pause, wait just a minute until it's safe to open your door.
Talking about bike lanes and how they really need to be respected, the work of a police officer for a motorist that really isn't treating the bike lane correctly, maybe doesn't know the etiquette of bike lanes. Could you talk about that at all?
Sure. In most cases, if there was an incident and the officer could educate the driver and the driver was willing to accept that information, then it would probably be just a warning. But you can write an actual motor vehicle violation for $100, and that would go on your record, and that would last for 6 years for insurance purposes.
Interesting. Okay. And I guess, Irene, staying with bike lanes and the way they should be treated, if there is no bicyclist in the lane, the driver of the vehicle still needs to respect that space. Correct?
Yes, yeah, you're not supposed to park in a bike lane. You're not supposed to, I mean, I think the most dangerous violation of driving in a bike lane or being in a bike lane would be to be stopped in a bike lane, because then what you're doing is you're putting the bicyclist, the more vulnerable person, in a situation where they need to merge into moving traffic in order to pass your vehicle. And so respecting the space of bicyclists is, it's a mutual respect thing. Bicyclists are allowed to use the travel lanes, and and the bike lanes. So I think if the bike lanes are clear, most bicyclists prefer to use the bike lane. But a lot of times there are obstacles or debris or double parked vehicles and lots of things that inhibit our ability to do so. And so we're forced into the vehicle lane. And I think, I mean, if you're moving through to go through an intersection, I think there's an acceptance of that practice, as long as you're aware of whether there's a vulnerable person in that lane at that moment or not. But parking in the bike lane is definitely a finable offense in Massachusetts.
And we should talk about laws regarding bicyclists on sidewalks.
Sure. Each city and town would have a city ordinance as to what they would require. Quincy says no riding on a sidewalk. Now, again, that's not to be abused. If a dad's trying to teach his kid how to drive, he's not going to put him out in the street. But it's really
Trial by
mainly
fire, I suppose, at that point.
mainly for downtown areas. And you can almost picture a child coming out of a candy store downtown. He runs out into the sidewalk, or an elderly person walks out and the bike hits him. You get some serious issues there of people getting injured, and that's mainly the reason why cities and towns create the city ordinance.
And would you like to add?
Yeah, so Quincy has that prohibition against cycling on the sidewalk anywhere in the city, but a lot of most of the rest of the state law, and that overrides the state law. But if you go by just the state law, other communities do allow you to ride on sidewalks outside of business districts where there would be the most conflict. I would remind people that although riding on the sidewalk seems like a safer option, it carries its own risks. You are on a bicycle, you're moving faster than anticipated traffic on a sidewalk. Most people are walking on the sidewalk or jogging, and as a bicyclist, you're moving 3 times as fast as most walkers with the same amount of effort. And so it again comes back to that predictability issue. You may not be anticipated by someone exiting a driveway. You may not be visible to people coming around a corner because of your proximity, right? So the line of vision is compromised for you. So if you are riding in a community where cycling, or part of a community where cycling on the sidewalk is allowed, I just encourage you to recognize those issues and behave accordingly. Take precautions, even though you feel like you're in a safer space on the sidewalk.
I know, Dan, we talked about pedestrian safety in previous shows, and we have done some public service announcements in the past. And the biggest thing or one of the things that was evident in those pieces or those shows was distractions.
Back in the day when we did those shows, the most important issue we really focused on was eye contact, to make sure that the driver sees you before you're going to walk across. If you're going to walk your bicycle across a crosswalk, again, just make sure they see you. And in like a street like Hancock Street with 4 lanes, just make sure that second lane that's coming towards you, that driver also sees you, because he could be blocked, his vision could be blocked.
So eye contact first, but it's also important to be aware not to have the music on too loud.
Absolutely. I just want to touch on one thing about the city ordinance, that if you were to strike someone, you could be, and it was viewed as being operating a bicycle without due care for other people, you could face criminal charges. You could also, if the person was injured, face civil charges too. You end up in court paying people's hospital bills. So something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. I know we will talk about kind of education classes, and I know that you've been a part of that in the past, continue to do so. But I do want to talk about bike helmets and the laws surrounding bike helmets in the Commonwealth.
The law in the Commonwealth is that anyone under the age of 16 is required to wear a helmet when operating a bicycle.
Okay, very good. And is that a finable offense if you are not?
I believe so. You would also not fine the child if he's 16 or under, but the fine would actually go to the parent.
Okay.
It's an interesting question, and I think there's an expectation from the driving public that if a cyclist isn't wearing a helmet, that they're needlessly putting themselves at risk. And I just like to remind bicyclists when I'm teaching them, I always wear a helmet. That is the league recommends that regardless of the law. You only have one beautiful brain. You don't want to damage it irreparably in any way. So wear a helmet, but also recognize that a helmet does not prevent crashes. A helmet is not a safety bubble that we put on. And so we need to still maintain awareness, maintain predictability, be visible, and obey the rules of the road in addition to wearing our protective gear.
The importance of what should be on a bicycle as far as safety, lights, reflectors, and the like?
Sure. The Vulnerable Road Users Law also created provision or requirement for a bicyclist to have a front light and a rear light. It used to be just a rear reflector, but now a bicyclist is required to have a rear red light and a front white light. It is not a violation that they can be pulled over for as an equity and justice issue, but it is a requirement. If there were other violations, I think it can be included in that. You could probably speak better to that than I can, obviously, but that is my understanding of the law. And again, the lights go toward visibility, especially near sunrise and sunset. Driver visibility is compromised, and we just want to make ourselves as visible as possible on the road.
Dan?
Well, I would say with all the motor vehicle violations that occur with the congestion in the city, that most police officers focus on vehicles. However, I do know of officers that would just roll the window down and just say, hey, you should really have a light. We couldn't see you. More of an educational moment. And this police department is very big on education.
We can talk about, I don't know what the correct term is, but I want to call them almost bike gangs.
That's a good term.
Those that are performing stunts in the middle of the road aren't paying attention to. If there is a bike lane, they're not paying attention to it. I know it's happened right out here on Washington Street. So Dan, could you talk about that?
Sure. Right now it's died down, but it's been a lot of rain this spring.
Come the summer months,
right.
It could be a problem.
A lot of times it's when the kids are last couple of weeks of school, they start organizing, and then it goes into the summer. And we've had the problem here in the city, but nothing compared to some of the larger cities. And what the police department would like you to do if you come across a situation where a kid's driving with just on one wheel and he's coming right towards you. We've had a couple of incidents of road rage, where the driver would get out, and now you're battling with a 15 or 16-year-old kid, and that's not going to go well for the driver. But we ask that you make a phone call, not just for your own sake, but for the sake of the child that's driving erratically, and for some motorists who just gets caught off guard, or we end up in a road rage.
It has been shown through studies that when we have safe cycling infrastructure, that traffic violations decrease in terms of bicyclist behavior. And I'm not going to say that's going to apply in this instance or in every instance, but the more we establish bicycling as part of our expected transportation network, the less it may be seen as a way to rebel. That's one thought I've had. It's a personal thought. I can't speak to whether or not that's true in the long run, but that is something I've considered. And I also, I know that having safe networks builds the bicycling community in every place where safe networks are built. The rate of cycling participation increases, and it becomes an expected and normalized part of our culture, or of the culture of that community. And so I would hope that might be a way to mitigate the irresponsible behavior that has been exhibited by some members of our community. And also, I would encourage people to recognize when those behaviors do cross the line into illegal behavior on the part of the bicyclist. So riding in the lane is not illegal. There is no law that requires both wheels to be on the ground. You are required to have one hand on the handlebars at all times. So if if a youth is in the middle of the driving lane and riding, that is not explicitly a traffic violation. And so I think it can be hard for a driver who's feeling antagonized in that situation to recognize where that line is.
And I think it's also the weaving in and out of traffic that's a problem.
It's going into the opposite lane, going towards a motor vehicle coming at you, and the poor driver is like, I'm not sure what to do here. I'm hitting the brakes, and these kids are still coming at me, and they're banging on the side of the car. And but the police department has done some enforcement. They've seized kids' bikes, and they can hold them for 15 days. Yeah. And it's not so much the loss of the bike most of the time. It's the fact that you have to go to your dad or mom and say, you need to get my bike at the police station.
Right.
So that's one of the best ways of enforcement. And again, that becomes educational.
How have laws changed over the years? Riding with traffic, riding against traffic, that has changed for bicyclists, or has it not?
No, this is a common misconception that I think the recommendation came from the idea that walking against traffic, because it gives you visibility, is safer, but as vehicles, bicyclists have always been expected to ride with traffic.
Very good. Thanks for setting me straight.
Sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you for setting me straight.
I'm happy to correct that, because we call it salmon riding when you're riding against traffic, and it's very dangerous, again, because it makes you unpredictable, and drivers aren't looking for people to come that way, and so you hear a lot of times, oh, I didn't see that person. It can contribute to a lack of awareness of your presence on the road. So riding with traffic is one of the basic tenets that we teach.
We've talked about education and continuing education regarding the rules of the road. Unfortunately, there have been fatalities in the city, there have been injuries, and something called ghost bikes have popped up in these problem spots, in these areas where there has been a fatality. Talk about ghost bikes as a concept, and then their placement, I guess, in the city.
So when a bicycle fatality occurs, the cycling community can sometimes choose to create a ghost bike as a way to honor the person who's died and create a memorial, but also its presence is a reminder and an awareness builder that a tragedy occurred, but also that you can contribute to the reduction of further tragedy through awareness and care and respecting the laws that create the guidelines for us to safely maneuver together in the world. And so that is the dual purpose of a ghost bike memorial: education as well as a tribute.
And currently, again, there were ghost bikes in the city.
Yes.
They have been removed.
Unfortunately.
That's I suppose, a ongoing communication with the municipality, in this case, the city of Quincy.
Yes. A lot of communities allow ghost bikes to remain in place for a certain amount of time. Quincy does not currently have a policy regarding that explicitly. So as a member of the commission, some of the community members are drafting a proposal that we hope the city will consider so that we can have a more consistent process should we ever have an incident where we would want to create a ghost bike again, which I hope we never do. But it would be nice to have a policy in place that allows us to know what the parameters are.
So this could end up on your desk, so to speak, as a counselor, correct?
Right. And I don't think it takes up much room, and the value of as a reminder and sending a message to motorists. Motorists might say, what is that? And they make an inquiry, and they recognize that, yeah, we've had some bad incidents in the city. The dedication that Irene and I went to on Hancock Street worked out as a beneficial purpose too. But that's where I met Irene. That's when we started talking about doing the show.
I suppose while we're talking about laws and potentially laws that could be enacted, can we talk about some future legislation, some future laws that might be considered or potentially are being considered?
So I'm sure you're aware of electric bicycles being a new component to the transportation network. And Massachusetts adopted the classification of 2 types of e-bikes. Nationally, the league has promoted three classes of e-bike, and they class 1 can go to 20 miles an hour with pedal assist only. Class 2, I'm probably going to mess it up, I apologize. But so it has to do with the amount of whether it's a pedal assist or a throttle and the speed limits for each of these kinds of electric assist bicycles. And by adopting that classification, it allowed the Blue Bike system to incorporate electric bicycles into its network. And electric bicycles are or e-bikes are such a wonderful range expander. They allow more people who don't have the confidence or physical ability to ride a standard bike, I guess we call it, to be able to try bicycling and find comfort and ease in the aspect. So I appreciate that the state is accommodating electric bicycles. So I know that's a still in process kind of adaptation as the technology advances and changes.
Okay. One of the thoughts, and I don't know how many years back this was, there was kind of a bike rental companies. I can't think of the name.
Oh, the dockless bike shares that we had in Quincy.
Right.
OFO, yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
why did they not succeed in this city?
So the 2 that we tried, it was OFO first that Mayor Koch brought in, and then OFO as a business failed, and then it was replaced by Lime Bike, and Lime as a business migrated, as I understand it, into scooter rentals as opposed to bicycle rentals. Both of those systems did have a lot of utilization in Quincy. They just didn't function as well as the Blue Bike system with the permanent docking stations that you have to return the bike to. They didn't function as well as business models, is my understanding. Currently, Quincy has a trial with Metro Mobility, which is another bike share company, similar to Blue Bike in that it has a dock station, but more comparable to Zipcar in that you rent the bike and utilize it and have to return it back to its parking spot. With Blue Bike system, you can rent from one dock bike across Boston and return it to a different dock. With Metro Mobility, it's a return to origin kind of system. So far, the Bike Commission received some data from the company showing the utilization. People are riding these to Weymouth, to Braintree. They're going pretty far range with these bicycles, and there's a lot of utilization. So hopefully, as that shows its usability and success, we can either expand that. I would love to see the city consider bringing Blue Bikes. It's already an established network and system, but if we could bring that to Quincy as well, it would be a wonderful resource.
As we kind of close this segment, as a counselor, Dan, what can you do? What will you continue to do in your ward to ensure bicycle safety as much as you possibly can?
Well, again, there's not a lot of bicycle travel, so the police department uses grants, and part of the grants is bicycle safety, and it's not to cite the bicyclist. It's more to educate the motorist as what their action was and how to correct that action.
And I guess probably the size of the road would determine if a bike lane was something that could be utilized on that roadway. Does that make sense?
Yes, there are space requirements And a lot of our waterways feel very narrow, but they're wider than we think. And sometimes all it takes is just a reallocation to right size the travel lanes, and then space can be found for bicycles. Right now, I'd like to say that the city has hired the Fuss & O'Neill company to update our bike network master plan. The existing one that was adopted by City Council back in 2014 is now 10 years old, so a lot of development, a lot of changes have happened, so the city wants to update that and see where we can continue to move forward with installing bike lanes. So there will be a public input process for that should be published by the commission and also by Quinn Cycles, the advocacy organization. We'll be trying to spread the word so that people who are interested in pushing for better and more bike facilities will have an opportunity to speak up in a way that the city will hear.
Very good. I want to thank you for joining me for this segment of In Your Neighborhood. Irene, we are actually going to let you, I suppose, bicycle out of here, and Councillor Minton and I will chat a little more about Ward 5, but thank you very much for sharing.
All right, I'll roll off.
We'll be right back with more about Ward 5. Please stay tuned. Welcome back to In Your Neighborhood. If you are just joining us, then you missed a spectacular beginning of the program, but you can always watch it again. And we have been, for those of you who don't know, we have been visiting Ward 5. That is Councillor Dan Minton's specialty. And now we spoke about bicycle safety, pedestrian safety, mostly bicycle safety. Now we're talking about other areas of the ward. Certainly bicycle safety is an issue, a subject that the city as a whole certainly can, I suppose, benefit from, the talk that we had. These are specific topics now dealing just specifically with Ward 5. So, Councillor Minton, I suppose, welcome back for the second half.
Always a pleasure to be here, Mark.
Great to have you. I do want to start with a college in your ward. Eastern Nazarene College is in your ward. Folks will know, of course, it's an operating college, but has recently been a shelter for immigrants.
Correct. As Eastern Nazarene calls their guests, family guests, and it's a very nice title. I've been in touch with Eastern Nazarene College during the entire process where they were taking these guests and they were basically setting them up to be moved on to a more secure facility, a hotel that might be available in another city or town. And a lot of rumors that were going around saying that it was all men, and that's going all through the country pretty much saying, but I live very close to Eastern Nazarene. I do a lot of walking, do a lot of biking. And what I see is families. And I see them as very nice people, very friendly people. A local resident was concerned about how many times the police were over there. And I have access to the police calls. And there were, during that period of time, 2-month period of time from like January to the end of February, there were 6 calls. And they were all medical. So that's why the police respond, the fire department often responds to the medicals. So there have been no issues aside from the initial protests from the neo-Nazis.
So do you think it's what folks are feeling about the politics of this issue is creating the issue?
Well, I would say that when I was running, I summed it up very simply that who would not want to come to this country? It's a land of opportunity. And I would always say you can't blame the people, but you can blame the process. We had a system where we knew who was coming in and coming out of the country, and that pretty much broke down. And so that's what caused a lot of people to be concerned about who's here in Quincy. And I've met with the president of the college, and I've talked to his underlings, and been no issues. And again, they keep to themselves. You see them walking around the neighborhood. They're very friendly. They don't, a lot of them don't speak English, but they're trying trying to be part of the community.
I was out earlier today, and I was actually able to, before the rains came in, able to grab some video of Pine Island. And that, for folks that don't know, is kind of connected to Blacks Creek, if you will, that area, a sailor's home pond. The mayor had proposed a footbridge at one point to connect, I believe, Pine Island to, would it be
Pageant Field.
Pageant Field. That has since come off the table.
So firstly, Pine Island is probably the centerpiece, if you will, of Blacks Creek. It's the part that jets out, not to be confused with the Sailor's Home Cemetery. Yeah, so initially, I believe the mayor had the idea of connecting Pageant Field to Pine Island. And when I was running for office, I grew up basically 2 blocks away from Pine Island. And I said, what a great idea, be able to have access for people to go out there and enjoy it. And then when I got elected, I met Sally Owen and her group of conservation people, and I went on a tour. And I knew the island like the back of my hand. But when she described the need to have a place for animals, birds, and she said that there's been a sighting of over 160 different types of birds out there. You know, my thought process changed, that it's like, let's just leave that alone. You know, let's leave it for the healthy environment of animals and plants, and not have a bridge there and have kids going over there drinking. I mean, there's a way to get out there.
Exactly. You could kayak out there. You can get out there, I think, in low
You
tide.
get out on low tide. It gets a little mucky, but you know, it's just a beautiful piece of land, and it's surrounded by a great marsh. So that was an eye opener, and I definitely changed my view on that.
So I guess the thought is creating a bridge would create too much traffic.
Right. Yeah. Again, you know, there's plenty of places in that whole Blacks Creek area. The walkway along Furnace Brook Parkway, Pageant Field, the Sales Home Cemetery. There's all sorts of areas you can walk around. But you know, again, I was totally convinced that just leave this alone.
Sailor's Home Cemetery, I was surprised, and maybe it has been gated for a while. It's gated, so you can't get into that area. Is there a reason?
Oh no, it's not gated. It's just a rope stopping cars from going in there.
Well, when you get into the path, but then the actual cemetery, there's
Oh no,
a chain link.
it's unlocked.
Okay.
It just looks that way.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I go out there all the time. I'll bike out there, and
It's a nice area.
yeah, it's very nice.
I know that the Director of Natural Resources, David Murphy, I believe it was last year, it might have been 2 years ago, was actually trying to cut down on the poison ivy that was growing
Right.
in that area, and actually brought in a company that had goats
Yeah,
eating
right.
the ivy.
I will say this about Dave Murphy and his crew of people. I had requested that they take some action out there for the cemetery, for wreaths out there, and he says we take them out every March, and then he jumped in and said, you know, the dead wood that's out there, the branches that are down, we clear it out so people can walk. And then there's at certain times of the year there's huge high tides, and so that first initial walkway when you go in would flood. And they said, can we do something about that? And he goes, no, you can walk around that because it's conservation land. So it's a learning process, but I do like the way the city looks at conservation land.
And we should mention that the path around, in low tide, I think the path around the island, or around that, not the island, but around
Cemetery.
that cemetery is actually accessible.
Right, it is. It's just a little higher up.
Princess Eve Drive Marsh.
You know, not a lot of people know where that is, and
I didn't.
I knew where it was, and interestingly, that's owned by Eastern Nazarene College.
Interesting.
And at one time, apparently they wanted to make fields, and I'm sure the conservationists back in the day said, no, you're not going to do that. But the issue there was I met some great people there, some neighbors, and again, it's part of the conservation committee. And the marsh is turning into be very unhealthy because not a lot of flow of water coming from Blacks Creek. And so that's one of the things that I've talked to Dave Murphy about, and that's something that we're going to take a serious look at. The pipe that goes under the road, it has eroded, and that's something that would possibly a reasonably quick fix to keep that marsh flowing. And there's some devices there to shut the water off and keep the water into the marsh until the next tide comes. So we're working on that. We're going to actually meet with the folks next week and see what we can do.
Very good. Pageant Field.
Pageant Field. I was up there the other day. Just amazing. I was up there for the Cleaner Greener and for the free hot dog. And
That's right, the cookout is at Pageant
yeah.
Field at the end.
And I hadn't been up there in a little bit. It is part of my ward, and it's just, Mayor Koch's got a great vision for that. It's a little bit of something for everybody. First, he put a nice walking path in there, and just very scenic, as I'm sure you know. And there's bocce courts there. There's going to be volleyball courts. There's a half basketball court, pickleball, horseshoes. So it's almost like geared for almost every group, and there's still plenty of room for fields. So I was very impressed with how that's gone.
And we should mention, I actually traveled on this trail. There's a Blacks Creek Trail for folks that is not very far from Pageant Field.
Right, yeah.
Kind of on the outskirts, I suppose.
Right, so it's kind of loop.
Right,
Yeah.
right. A good way to start your day for anyone
Absolutely.
to start their day.
Yeah.
I was out and about through your ward, and of course, covering the Quincy City Council, the proposal for what is the Grossman property, which folks will now know at one end is TJ Maxx, at the other end used to be Boston Market.
Right.
That's slated for change at some point.
That's correct. So it's not clear exactly what the change is going to be, but Grossman's, I believe, still owns the property. If you go back the way as far as I do, there used to be a Grossman's store there, and there's a Grossman's plaque at the end of Fenno at Quincy Shore Drive for all the dedication to the city that they have.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Like, that's because of the biking. Going back to the biking.
Very good.
So that is in the works, and you would lose possibly those shops. But there's nothing that says you can't retain those. If you're going to build condos, you can always have storefronts on the first floor too.
And that's pretty much the development that has happened, that has either been apartment buildings or condos. That first level, that
Right.
first ground level has been retail.
Right. As an example, coming forward is Trader Joe's.
Is Trader Joe's a definite?
As I understand it is. That'd be a
Okay.
great addition.
That certainly would be a great addition. Talking about markets, I suppose, the concern that Star Market, which is kind of across the road from
Right.
the Grossman properties, the concern that that was going to go as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of rumors, Mark, about that being taken as a property for parking garage. And the irony is that Star Market just did their store over the last couple of years. Looks great, very clean, ample parking. So it's a store that, if it was gone, would have a major impact on the residential area surrounding the store. In addition, there's 4 senior buildings, 2 on School Street and 2 on Granite Street. And a lot of times they don't have vehicles or they just want to pop out and get something quick. So we're hoping that that's going to stay there, and I would make every effort to keep that there.
And right now, there's no plan for that.
There's no
property.
plan.
Okay. I do want to talk about the MBTA garage, which is still in operation. Still, it sits in your ward. However, the proposed new facility is still being worked on. That is on Bergen Parkway. But your concern is what happens to the original location.
Right. So that was kind of a trade-off. That the city would get that present lot, and there was talk at one point of making a bubble facility, and now I'm hearing more that it's going to be open space, and that would be kind of consistent with the entire area going down from Furnace Brook and Hancock.
Which
all
you
the
would
way
be a
back.
proponent of.
Yeah, definitely.
Would it be open space, you think, that would mirror the passive park that used to be the Beachcomber?
I haven't heard anything about that. I'd heard more it was just going to be more part of the Marymount Park.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll see as these will come up likely before the council, correct?
It will definitely come up before the council, but the other project, the new project's not even close. So we're going to be with this for 1 or 2 years anyway.
The new garage. Right. They're still doing a lot
Right.
of
The old
work on it.
garage can't move till the new garage goes over, and if you ride by there, it seems like a very slow project, but I'm sure there's issue with drainage and all the bits and pieces we don't know about.
You know, it's a shame that the shell of that building, of the Lowe's building, couldn't have been used as the shell of the building for the.
You're not the first person to say that.
MBTA.
Yeah.
I guess lastly, we'll kind of end with pedestrian, we'll kind of end with pedestrian safety, I suppose, bicyclist safety and motorist safety on Quincy Shore Drive. We are recording this program at the beginning of the season of spring, so things tend to ramp up, certainly during the summer months on Quincy Shore Drive.
Right. This has always been one of my pet peeves as a police officer and living in the Wallaston area. That even probably two-fifths of a mile away from the beach, they hear motorcycles, cars zooming by, and they would often come off of the Quincy Shore Drive, come off of Rice Road, Fenno. So last week I met with Chief Kennedy of the Quincy Police Department, and he's a great guy. You know, he's all for making things better, and I addressed that Quincy Shore Drive has been a problem for years, and I addressed traffic violations, speeding cars namely, again, pedestrians trying to get across the street to go to Tony's or someplace like that, loud cars, altered exhaust systems, motorcycles whining it out, partying on the beach with drinking drugs, loud stereos, and large groups blocking access on the sidewalk, even though it's double the size. And he was very attentive to what my concerns were, but we both acknowledged that Quincy Shore Drive really isn't Quincy's jurisdiction.
That's my next question.
And so I asked him if he could talk to somebody higher up in the state police and see if we can get Jules' jurisdiction over the summer to do some enforcement of all those categories I mentioned. And it wasn't, the day hadn't ended, and he had notified me that he had talked to the major in charge of the area, and they're going to use what they call their CAT team, which is basically a community services unit, and we're going to use our community service units, the old community policing, and our SOU, which is motorcycles, to start to crack down on those incidents that I talked about. One of the problems that occurred probably 4 or 5 years ago was that Castle Island had a lot of problems with youth, and I don't want to say gangs, but groups of people. And so they shut the bar across the access road down to 10 p.m., and we were getting the runoff. And the state police did a great job by posting that you had to be off the beach by 11 o'clock unless you were near one of the restaurants. So I'm very optimistic that this is going to be tightened up. The people are flying down that street. So I think that working together, I think that'll be a great teamwork.
And as we close, just some, I suppose, connections or working with the Quincy Police Department regarding some classes, regarding self-defense classes or safety
Sure.
classes?
Yeah, sure. So when I left in 2020, I had probably done 15 years of pepper spray classes, self-defense classes. We did child safety programs, and COVID kind of killed those programs. But the lieutenant in charge of these programs is now kicking them into full speed, and I can't say enough about the pepper spray class. You don't have to be 18. You only have to be 18. You don't have to have a permit. If you use it wrongly, then you can be held responsible. But to me, it's just a great thing to have. And again, our parks are safe, but you just never know who's in the park. If you're going out to Pine Island, coyotes out there, and is rabid. It's good to have the pepper spray. And very. I don't want to use Pine Island as an example of having someone bad out there, because it just doesn't happen. But it's just a great tool to have.
Counselor, thank you so much for joining me today. Certainly a very informative show.
I think everybody caught up to date in my 3 months that I've been doing this job. So
Very
it
good.
works out good.
We'll make this seasonal, so
Okay.
we'll be back maybe sometime late summer.
Sounds great.
Thank you at home for watching, and please remember to support Quincy Access Television for more programming just like this.